Girls
versus
Ghouls.
I can't remember what my dream was though.
I
but I
started
hated
recording.
You-
This is now.
did have a nightmare?
She cried all night.
Yeah, I said I did have nightmares. Literally, I was like, every time we thought we were safe, and of course, watching movies like this with Jill is always a great time because she makes me even more scared.
I do.
Yes, because every time you're scared, I'm 10 times scared.
Good evening and welcome. This is Girls vs. Ghouls. Nestled within a cozy Los Angeles suburb is a seemingly unassuming house. If you were to walk by unawares, you would have no way of knowing that it was the site of a series of paranormal events, which would become the subject of an intensive and well-documented parapsychological research study of poltergeist activity in the 1970s, later immortalized in a best-selling novel and cinematic depiction. What makes this story different from any others we've discussed thus far on the podcast is that the house itself is not the focus of the activity as much as it is merely the setting of activity. For a poltergeist is typically tied to or manifesting from a person rather than embedded within the environment. In this case, an unfortunate woman who resided at the Los Angeles home was plagued for years by poltergeist activity, which followed her to multiple locations after the events of the investigation. So sit back and enjoy this week's episode as we discuss the famous and disturbing case of Doris Bither. All right, so this one was a doozy, you guys. There was a lot of disturbing information in this one. And how much did you guys feel you knew about poltergeist before we learned about this one?
I mean, I don't know. I don't want to say I'm an expert or anything. I watch a lot of ghost stuff. I feel like I generally understand what it is, you know?
I had no goddamn idea.
Like, I guess it's the ones that you associate with things moving.
Do I still know? I don't even know. It's so what it is. Tell me if I'm probably wrong. So it means like it's haunting you, like a person, and not like a place. Is that what it is?
Like I said in the outset, typically it's tied to an individual, and that's how it can follow them around. And also, there's hypotheses about how it's possible that what we call poltergeist activity could also be the result of energy manifesting from an individual, which is why it tends to center around people who have undergone a lot of trauma. And also the age range for when poltergeist activity starts in many cases is like the pre-adolescent teenage years, when someone's undergoing a lot of stress and change in their lives, and then you'll see some activity pick up, and then it could even die down as they get a little older. So yeah, that's what makes it very unique compared to what we're usually talking about, which is a residual haunting or a intelligent haunting, which is completely separate from the person, usually tied to a location. Does that make sense? So I can give some more information that I have written down here. So poltergeist comes from the German for polter, which means noise, and geist, which means spirit. So poltergeist, so noisy spirit. And it's a disembodied spirit, which is credited with certain malicious or disturbing phenomenon. And what you'll typically see with these is sudden wild movements, inexplicable noises and sounds, strange smells, usually household objects breaking and being knocked over, things being pushed, people being pushed and shoved in some more violent cases. Things even there's been instances where fires have been started as a result of the activity, reportedly. And these events can be very sporadic, unpredictable, often repetitive. As we saw, for example, in the film on this case, the entity, where we usually saw it would just like kind of explode all of a sudden, and there'd be this activity that would cause things to move, sounds to occur, people being shoved, etc.
I'm just skimming through the difference between ghosts and poltergeist.
Gotcha.
And demons.
So what are you seeing? Oh,
Well,
yeah,
I'm still
the
reading.
third category.
And the demons, yes, that other thing. Could it be a demon?
Yeah, we should do an episode on like we should do an episode on like demon like type in like activity or like famous case of demons, because I think that would be a really good like kind of well-rounding of the different types of spirits, I suppose. Because besides like spirit, okay, so we got ghosts, we got poltergeists, we got demons. What else is there? I don't know.
Can you not classify
Bigfoot.
a poltergeist under
Well,
a
yeah, then
ghost?
you're getting into cryptids.
Or are they
I think
just
it is
completely
technically, but
different?
no, they're distinct enough that yeah, they're distinct enough, I think.
That would be putting it under it being a completely different entity group, I guess. From
It kind of
ghost.
is.
I like to think. I don't think we've ever experienced. I don't think I've. I mean, except for that one time the guitar moved in my room. I don't know who did that though. That could have been Johnny. Still, I still think it was Johnny. But
Oh yeah,
beyond
could you
that,
tell us that story again? I kind of don't remember that story. You in passing mentioned it.
um, it was okay. Let me think. Was it nighttime or was it daytime? I feel like it was daytime, and my bedroom door was closed. Now here's the okay. Now let me try to remember. Was it because my window was open, so like the door I think got shut because of the breeze. And when I opened the door, the guitar that's normally by my desk against the wall was in the middle of the room, just like standing up. But I mean, it's
So
not.
it moved
I mean, I don't. Yeah, it
like
wasn't.
kind of
It
far.
was. Yeah, it would have been like it was like feet from where it normally was. Like normally it's against the wall, leaning against something, and then it was just standing up in the middle of the room. Which at the time, but at that point, I didn't even know I could stand it up on its own. At that point, I did learn like it can stand up on its own. You just have to like hold it at the right
Oh, you
spot.
gonna learn.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
learned that you can like because I tested it. I'm like, can you even like how easy is it to get it to stand up by itself? And it was pretty easy to just hold it, and as long as it didn't tilt to one side or the other, it would stay there. But yeah, that's the only time I
And you
think
asked Johnny?
I've asked Johnny and he claims he says to me he didn't do it. I think at the time it was only me and Johnny living in the house with mom and dad still, so you guys definitely couldn't have done it. So yeah, but I don't know. I think
That
beyond
could have been
that,
the old lady then.
maybe she just like wanted it and she was telling me like you need to move this shit. I
Yeah,
know. If
exactly.
I think about it, no, I feel like where I saw the ghost standing was a little bit closer to the mirror than where the guitar was. So I don't think it was standing. It was in the same place. I don't think it was. I don't really remember. I didn't measure it. It's geometry, I didn't sit there and like it's tread its course. No,
Well,
I was just like put it back and move
I doubt
on.
that was. Yeah, I don't think that was poltergeist, probably. But if any of us were to be the catalyst for a poltergeist, I think it would be you, Madeline.
Allison's the one turning off TVs these days with her
That's
whatever.
true. And her Nana's TV.
And you're freaking out, Nana. How dare you?
What do you mean? What am I doing?
She is old
I
and
didn't do it.
fragile, and you cannot be
Okay,
scaring
so that
her.
was a coincidence. She's old and fragile. She was scared though. She told me she was gonna call me. What the fuck?
Like, Allison, what have you done?
It was pretty funny.
Oh, cool. So I am going to start. Before we go into the details of the case that we're going to be discussing, the Doris Bither case in Los Angeles in the 1970s, I want to talk about a few examples of other notable poltergeist activity, just brief synopsis, to give more of a breadth of the pattern that we're talking about that typically is associated with poltergeist, and then we can bring that understanding with us into learning more about the Doris Bither case. So I'm going to start with a case which is pretty cool. Actually, what inspired the famous 80s horror film Poltergeist that everyone knows about. So let me quickly go over what that case was about. It's okay. So the actual story took place in the late 1950s in Long Island. And I will include in the show notes some links to articles on these cases that I'm discussing if anyone's interested in reading up on these themselves later. But yeah, 1950s Los Angeles, and it was in a post-war suburb, and as usual, things were not always what they seemed. In 1958, something strange started brewing within one of the houses in the Seaford area. And the kickoff event here was in February of 1958. James Herman, which was the man of the house, right? He lived there with his wife and his couple kids. Got a call from work from his wife Lucille to tell him that something strange was happening at home. His teenage kids heard popping sounds that they couldn't explain happening around the house. So they're at home and they just keep hearing this pop, pop, pop coming from different parts of the house and they couldn't figure out what it was. It was very strange. Okay. So when they were trying to explain what was going on, they went around the house and found out that what that popping sound had been were that the caps of various bottled items around the house were just coming off, like popping off inexplicably. We're talking shampoo bottles, bleach bottles, cleaning bottles, and notably a vial of holy water. They were a devout Catholic family, so I guess when you're a devout Catholic family, you just keep that around the
Gotta
house.
keep
I
it
don't
on
know, we weren't
hand.
Catholic, just in case those demons come by.
We just had
So,
crosses at the front door. That kept the demons at bay. Us and our
yeah, the
Methodist
demons weren't enough
beliefs.
for us. Yeah, but Catholics ain't playing around apparently, because they kept their holy water. But unfortunately, whatever was happening and whatever was messing with things in the house got to their holy water and popped that bottle right off. Pop that cap.
It's like, look what I can do
And
to
this
your holy
happened.
water.
Yeah, I know, kind of a flex maybe, a threat. Like, oh, even your holy water is no match for me. Pop that cap right off. And they couldn't. They could not understand why this was happening. And not only did this happen once, but this occurred multiple times. That the caps would just pop off the bottles. So eventually, they called the police because they were at a loss. They didn't know what to do. I guess they were hoping they could have some experience with like weird things that happen in houses, and they searched for an explanation. And one of the things that they suggested was there could be some kind of weird chemical reaction happening with the bottles, but that search turned up nothing, because typically when there's a chemical reaction that produces enough pressure to, in this case, potentially pop up all these bottles, you would expect like some heat from the bottles, and there was no heat. They looked at the substances, there was nothing off about them. They could not explain why these bottle caps were popping off. And furthermore, while the cops were there, more bottles had their caps popped off. So they had witnesses. So the cops are known to have witnessed this. And so they also looked for radio transmissions or electrical disturbances. Everything in the house was normal. They couldn't understand what was
Like,
going
maybe
on.
it's the Russians.
Something like a Stranger Things type thing, where it's like something really weird, but turns out to be like ultra-dimensional experimentation. Well, in any event, eventually they called in a priest to bless the home. But unfortunately, as often happens in horror movies, that only caused the activity to amp up. And so the incidences went from the cap popping incidents to things more violent happening. So we're talking like items from the home like being knocked off and smashed, and a whole bookcase like was tipped over and all the items were knocked off. And it was then that it was suspected that this could be a poltergeist. And notably, a paranormal investigation did take place, but the findings that the researchers had were considered inconclusive, meaning they couldn't say either or if it was a poltergeist or not that was causing this, or definitively determine what was the cause of it. The activity did eventually stop. Um, and one of the long going theories among people who study poltergeist activity is that it could have been, as you mentioned before, one of the teenage children who could have been the catalyst for these events. Because, as we mentioned, part of the typical case study is that you'll have like a younger, prepubescent, early teenage person could be the source of a lot of the activity. So that's actually the case that inspired Poltergeist, and it is nothing like the movie, let me tell you. There was a lot of exaggeration in the film apparently.
That's usually how it goes. I
Yeah.
love when you find out a movie had like a true story background.
I think it's still an interesting case. I mean, It's like kind of like a small little thing, but it would be kind of eerie if your bottle caps were popping off of your bottles all the time and you
And then it
didn't
just
know
stops.
why.
It just started and it stops. You're like, I don't know. What do you do?
Yeah, and then you kind of I know these people probably spent the rest of their lives just wondering like
Waiting
what
for some
was
bottle
that?
caps to be popping.
Yeah.
They're paranoid.
Yeah, they're just forever in terror that their caps could start popping off again. A renowned and quite controversial case known as the Enfield Poltergeist. I think I'm pronouncing that correctly, Enfield or Enfield. I'm gonna say Enfield. And the reason why it's controversial, well, it's controversial, but I nevertheless wanted to bring it up because it did fit a lot of the basic criteria for poltergeist activity. But it's controversial because it would involved a couple little kids, and towards the end of the main activity, journalists, this happened in England, and journalists got really interested and involved. And the little kids, like, we know this is the case. The little kids, like, did things specifically to, like, mess with the journalist or, like, make the journalist, like, come and be excited and stuff like that. And so the fact that the little kids did that is, like, a big mark of discrediting, uh, this case for a lot of people. But nevertheless, this case I thought was rather interesting in the details. So let me get into it. So, like I said, it took place in England in the 1970s, and it involved two sisters, and they were aged 11 and 14. August 1977. So it was a single parent named Peggy called the police to her rented home in Enfield, claiming she had witnessed furniture moving and that two of her four children were telling her that knocking sounds were being heard on the walls. The children were Margaret, the 14-year-old, and Janet, 11. Claims included disembodied voices, loud noises, thrown toys, overturned chairs, and children even levitating. And this occurred over a course of 18 months with lots of witnesses. So we're talking more than 30 people, including the police constable, neighbors, psychic researchers who came, several journalists who came to the house and variously saw activities such as heavy furniture moving on its own accord, objects flying across the room, the daughters seeming to levitate several feet off the ground before falling back down, and many other also heard there. And also there's an EVP of knocking noises happening on the walls, as was said before, and also a gruff voice was apparently captured on as an EVP. But towards the end of the activity, it garnered a lot of attention, like I said before. To one of the little girls or something, or both the little girls working together, like did pranks on the journalists, and people found out about that, and of course were like, okay, they must have been making up the whole thing. Uh, which that could be the case, but
I think it's an
prior to that,
interesting
we did have
like conclusion. Like, oh, there's these young girls didn't take it very seriously. They must be lying. It's like they're children.
that's essentially what it that's essentially what it boils down to is that we have these little kids and yeah, I guess they didn't take it seriously enough, and so that's considered like discrediting of all the events that was witnessed by you know dozens of people. uh and yes, and like with a lot of these cases, the activity eventually stopped. So the main events, like I said, occurred over just 18 months, and then the activity stopped. And yeah, that's the Enfield, England haunting, which is still a pretty famous case. From what I understand, if you're really interested, you can go into this one, and there's a lot of documentation and a couple books that were written on it. Because, like I said before, researchers got involved, and wrote some papers on it. And I'd recommend reading it if you're interested in learning more.
I'm pretty sure this is the same
So,
case that The Conjuring 2 is about. I'm pretty sure.
wait, really?
Yeah, I think that. Yeah.
I haven't seen that
Let
movie.
me just use the old goggles. Hold on. Conjuring.
What? Oh,
Google.
you mean the Googles?
Yeah.
Oh, it is.
Yeah.
Maybe I should see that movie then. Okay, so The Conjuring 2 is based on the Enfield poltergeist haunting.
Later.
Yeah, it's the series that is based on the work of the famous
The Warrens.
paranormal research couple, Ed and Lorraine Warren. Yeah.
They sound like pretty cool conversation people. But, I think they're both
I'm sure they were.
dead now. I think they're both dead.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
They probably would have been fun to like have at a dinner party. All their stories.
Very interesting.
I think that's cool. All right, so I'm just going to talk about one more case that I found it's from a paper that I found that I want to link, which is a poltergeist phenomena primer. So it goes through the distinct like what makes a poltergeist activity, yeah, a primer. So like introduction to or beginning to do research into the topic of poltergeists.
Get
And it
primed.
has several case studies. Exactly. And it has several case studies. And I'm just going to read off one of the case studies. And I'm going to link the paper when we release the episodes. If anyone's interested in learning more, I thought this was a really interesting place to start. Okay, so the case study I'm going to read from this paper is called A New England Haunt. And this took place in New England in the late 1970s, early 1980s. Okay, so here's this story. So in May of 1979, Mr. and Mrs. Barini moved into their New England home along with their two children. The two children were Mrs. Barini's from a previous marriage. From that time up until August of 1989, I'm talking like over a year, like 16 months, the family reportedly witnessed poltergeist activity and even apparitions in the home at various times. 3 apparitions were seen or heard. On 6 separate nights, Mr. and Mrs. Barini heard the voice of a little girl crying for her mother, with Mrs. Barini hearing it first and then alerting her husband. The second apparition was experienced one morning when Mrs. Barini woke up and saw the figure of a little boy dressed in white standing in the hallway. Mr. Barini also saw the boy apparition on a separate occasion as he witnessed it trying to pick up a rug in the hall. When he later investigated by pulling up the floorboards underneath where the rug had been, he found a medallion of the Virgin Mary was hidden underneath. Absolutely creepy
So
little.
the ghost child is lifting up rugs, and then he lifts up the rug. It's like he unlocked a quest or something.
It's true. You get the Virgin Mary medallion.
You get to unlock the basement door or something.
That's not a ride I want to be on. I'll tell you that right now.
I know. I feel like I'm supposed to do something.
You don't want to unlock. It's like
If I
Ghost Whisper. Remember that show where she would always have to help the ghost move on with her.
Oh yeah, and it would
What's
give
her
a clue.
name? It's like her heart. Something heart. Jennifer.
Is it
What's her name?
Hewitt?
Yes, Hewitt.
Jennifer Love Hewitt?
Yes.
Yeah.
There we go. Love,
I
not
remember
heart.
that
I was like,
show.
there's something
Dude,
to do with this.
Oh my God, Ghost Whisper. When we were young, we
Mom
used to watch
loved
that show.
that
every
show.
week.
Yeah. It was a good show. It was pretty good overall.
I remember it being a good show. Cause yeah, every episode had a little bit of mystery to it, where she had to like follow some clues to uncover either what happened to the ghost. So it was a bit of a detective kind of true crime aspect to it, which
Yeah.
I liked. There was also a few episodes. Now that you mention it, I'm starting to get memories of a couple episodes that I thought were really creepy.
Brain blast.
Like there was one. I don't know if you remember. There was one where she was in a. It involved like a sorority house, and one of the girls were murdered in like a hazing ritual.
I remember that one very vividly.
Yeah, she was a blonde. I remember that one so vividly. I remember it actually like quite. I thought it was so sad. That was a really sad episode.
It's really sad that happens. I think that needs to. I don't know. Humans are strange creatures. I think that's what we do. Weird things. I don't know. Like, why do we do that?
Don't haze each other. Yeah, exactly. It's like, why do you do that?
Why?
It's like
I don't
strange
understand. We just not.
ritual
Let's just get into
that just
study
makes
groups.
people-
Let's do that instead of drinking excessively and then dying in our own vomit.
Can I? Well, I'll drink and study, but
Okay,
not in my own
not
vomit.
excessively to the point where you are dying of alcohol poisoning.
I've never drunk that much.
I
I
couldn't-
don't think I could.
Yeah, I've never drank to the point where I've like forgotten anything. I couldn't even imagine.
Okay, here's the real question. Allison, have you ever blacked out from drinking?
I don't like that I'm on the spot.
It's just a yes or no question.
No.
That's good.
I think I visually I remember all of it.
Okay, we're talking about something
honestly
serious.
just gonna
Hazing
watch
is
it
a
back
serious
on tonight
issue.
and
all
then
this
go
needs I
on.
know all that needs to just cut out. Those are outtakes. Anyway, back to the topic at hand. What were we talking about?
Okay.
Did you finish telling the
Oh yeah,
stories?
the New England haunting. one.
Okay. I don't
Yeah.
know.
Okay. Anyway, so that tangent came about because Mr. Barini pulled up the rug where he saw the apparition of a little boy in white pull up his rug and found under the floorboard there the medallion of the Virgin Mary underneath. Afterward, the apparition appeared 2 or 3 times a week, so increased in frequency, making brief statements and sometimes responding to questions asked by the Barinis. They did not always both see it at the same time it appeared.
What did it
In
say?
some instances, the appearance of the apparition it doesn't say.
Oh my
Yeah,
god, I
was
want
about
to
to say, the casing isn't
know. Like, did it
detailed,
just give
but
it some
maybe
like tidbits? Like, what? This like random. What did it say?
there's more details a little farther down about things that they were hearing. So maybe we'll get like I said, once when it appeared, Mrs. Barini purposefully ignored it as she was instructed to by the family priest. So she told him, and she's like, "Hey, if you see this thing again, do not talk to it. Don't look at it because it's going to feed off your energy, essentially." Which is something I've heard a lot from different spiritual leaders or a tenet of different faiths regarding entities. Sometimes is that this idea that by you acknowledging it or uh speaking to it or trying to interact with it in some way, you're giving it like you're making it gets bolder when you do that. And so that's what she did. And she said that as she did that, the bedroom closet door then began opening and slamming shut about 20 times. You could imagine like a horror movie where the door just starts slamming over and over
That
and over.
sounds shitty.
Are you kidding me? I don't even know what I would do. I don't even know what I would think. I'd probably run out of the room. One of those times the door opens, I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, now go pa, and like
It's-
leave. Open, close, open, close. One of those opens, you run.
You gotta time it.
Wait for it to
Like
open.
like a quick time
You
part
time
of a video
perfectly.
game.
Yeah, you just got X, square,
Yeah,
triangle.
exactly.
Right bumper, go.
Square, go.
I did it. Then you trip on a spike.
I just thought that that was such a power move on the part of this entity because it's like I know you're trying to ignore me, so I'm gonna do really freaking freak you out right now. That's the impression I got from that detail.
So is it a, so are we
So
or a,
that
but is
happened.
that I mean if you can see it, it's not a poltergeist. You saw the ghost. Is there more than one ghost? You can see it, it's not a poltergeist.
Well, there's
How many
well
were
the
haunting them?
manifestations as like an so the manifestation of a poltergeist activity as some kind of apparition does not necessarily mean that it wasn't a poltergeist because things manifesting is typical of can be typical of a poltergeist haunting. For example, like liquids can appear during a poltergeist haunting. Like there's like remember the example of the oily sheen on the blinds, for example, or like things dripping down walls. So these are like different examples of things manifesting materially. So that would be an example of
It
that.
kind of seems like
If you're
the
seeing
child
something, it's a
ghost
material
thing
manifestation.
is not the same as the whatever poltergeist activity they'd be having because that's like an intelligent haunting that was like interacting and speaking with them, answering questions. That's I mean, as far as I understand, I don't think poltergeists do that. That's diff.
That's the interesting thing about this from a parapsychological perspective because psychologically the human mind we're capable of conjuring a lot of things in our heads and for us to completely believe that that's what's happening. And if a poltergeist activity is a manifestation of the interior world of a person, manifesting like different elements that are indicative of trauma perhaps they've had in their lives is part of what you'll read in some of these case studies. So it'll take very particular forms and often be tied to past trauma that a person could have experienced in the past. or be representative of something else that they're trying to work through or need to work through. Fascinating stuff. So I just want to finish this story. So here's where we're going to get into like what some of the actual phrases were. And okay, it says Mr. and Mrs. Barini both saw on separate occasion what they described as a black caped figure with a humpback, which spoke in a gruff male voice. The figure usually spoke to Mrs. Barini while she was praying, reportedly saying really disturbing things to her to break her concentration during prayer. When she asked who it was, it reportedly replied, "I am a minister of God." The phenomenon also consisted of objects moving. The night following the initial appearance of the humpback apparition Mrs. Barini said she saw, the phone beside the bed reportedly kept flying across the room. A lamp next to the bed fell on her head. Dishes, crosses, and religious figurines also moved and broke on other occasions. Large objects such as the cupboard, a bookcase, and a desk moved more than once. The object which reportedly moved the most was the retractable staircase leading to the attic, which opened and slammed shut with such force that it began forming a crack in the hall ceiling. Nearly all the movements and events that occurred would only occur when Mrs. Barini was present or nearby. She was filled with tension and interpersonal problems because she had an unhappy childhood and felt distant from her mother and the rest of her family. Her relations with Mr. Barini's family were also strained, so she felt really isolated and apparently faced confusion and conflict in her own personal, like, interior life because she had to convert from Judaism to Catholicism for the sake of her in-laws. These difficulties seem to be symbolically represented in some of the reported phenomenon. For instance, as was noted in the case report, and then here's not a very long quote. Quote, "The little girl who seemed to call for her mother, and the first words of the white boy apparition were, 'Where do all the lonely people go?' and 'Where do I belong?' and seemed to match Mrs. Barini's inability to reach the attention of her own mother and the rejection she experienced from her family. In addition, the confusion and conflict that Mrs. Barini faced from her religious conversion seemed to be reflected in the movements and breakage of crosses and religious figures, as well as the appearance and the behavior of the third ominous-looking apparition. The Barini family briefly moved out of their home in September 1981 when they asked a Catholic priest to perform an exorcism. After this, no other phenomenon reportedly occurred. In this particular report, those were, that plus I am a minister of God, and that doesn't go into detail, but apparently telling her, quote, really disturbing things. So it could be like really raunchy, it could be really sexual, it could be really insulting, but they don't lay out what those particular words were. All right, so that was the last case I wanted to talk about. So on this note, now that we've heard details about some notable poltergeist activity cases other than this one, let's now backtrack back to Los Angeles, California in the 1970s and the story of Doris Bither, who had to undergo horrific, absolutely disturbing attacks multiple times over the course of a couple years, honestly. And the subject of, like I said before, an intensive and well documented parapsychological research study. So, Madeline, on that note, let's kick this off and get details about the Doris Bither case.
All right. Well, first we're going to talk about four main characters in this story. I guess technically three, but one, I guess, secondary commentator. Kinda. Yeah. So, first we're going to talk about Dr. Barry Taft, who is a parapsychologist. He has a doctorate in psychophysiology with a minor in biometrical engineering. Was a research assistant at UCLA Parapsychology Laboratory from 1969 to 1978. And Dr. Barry Taft has investigated more than 4,000 cases of ghosts, hauntings, poltergeists, and conducted extensive studies in telepathy and precognition.
Wait, what the hell is parapsychology?
Um, it's they like the definition, the study of the relationship between physiological and psychological phenomenon.
I have a question. You're telling me these are actually degrees I can get?
At least in the
Like
at least
what is that? You said like telepath? You can get a telepath degree?
He did it. I mean, it's not really a degree.
Telepathy?
He just studies telepathy. He studied like the phenomena, I guess. Yeah, I said, but not like I don't know if you can necessarily go to like in the 60s and 70s. Like this was parapsychology was something that people like even the government was really into. But I don't even then, like, I don't think the parapsychology department was funded by the UCLA campus like other departments were. Like, even then, it wasn't really taken as seriously as other fields. So I'm not sure if you can even study that at a college these days. It might depend on the college. I haven't looked at all of them, obviously. So maybe, I'm not exactly sure. But I don't know how, like, serious people, I don't know, people don't really talk about that as much I feel like as they did like in the 60s or 70s when it was like really people were excited about it. I'm not sure how it is, you know what I'm saying.
So real quick, I just did a quick search, and one of the first things that came up is apparently the University of Edinburgh has a parapsychology unit today.
Ooh.
Where you can study parapsychology and do ESP research.
So there you go. If you want to go to Edinburgh, if you want to study parapsychology.
Yeah.
But yeah, so he came up with the methodologies for remote viewing. That's exciting. If you don't know what remote viewing is, if you've ever seen Ghostbusters, it's what Dr. Bateman is doing in the beginning with those two college students when he zaps the man and like the guy's guessing the right thing, but like, Bateman's kind of a creep. I watched that movie yesterday and I was like, when he was like hanging out in Diane's, is that her name? Apartment with him, like he was being so weird, like in a way that was like you would act if you knew that person for a while, but like in the movie he like just met her and it was just really weird. 80s, I guess. But yeah, that is what they're doing. That's like remote viewing, where you see different rooms or something, and you say like this person's holding a pencil, and they're like yeah, and then you move on. Next thing, no, this person's looking at a picture of the ocean, something like that.
I will say I have none of those abilities.
Yeah,
I wouldn't know the fuck you're holding.
I don't. Okay,
it's like, and she sucks.
Get her out of my sight. He himself, Barry Taft, was investigated as a psychic subject in 1969, the results of which were published in a behavioral what the hell is this word? Neuropsychiatry? Neuropsychiatry? That's how you spell psychiatry? When was the last time I looked at that word? That doesn't look right. I feel like I've never looked at that word on like as a like I feel like I've only ever heard this word. I like looking at it, that doesn't look right. He was also himself investigated as a psychic subject in 1969, the results of which were published in Behavioral Neuropsychiatry, a laboratory investigation of telepathy, a study of a psychic. That's what the headline, I guess you call it, of the study was called. Sounds interesting. And I guess like essentially the conclusion, I guess I found the general conclusion of the study. I didn't find the actual study. I think I found the I found it in the I looked up the magazine and I was able to find and it basically gave me a summary of it. They did a series of experiments on, at the time he was 21 years old, who claimed he had telepathic abilities. The authors concluded that this experiment strongly suggests the possibility of telepathy, but does not prove it. So that was their overall conclusion from their study. Interesting?
That's so
Yes.
interesting. That's really interesting.
So yeah, I guess he's a psychic.
Good for you.
Good for you. Did it.
Yeah.
Dr. Taft has also appeared on numerous TV shows and radio programs talking about his works and studies. He has he has served as a technical advisor or script doctor on the films Logan's Run, Demon Seed, Altered States, Poltergeist, and The Entity. Script doctor. Let me know if that's an actual thing, because that sounds made up as shit. With the witch doctor.
So is a script doctor just someone who has a doctorate who writes a script?
Maybe. That sounds like, why do you gotta put doctor in it? That's like, what are you doing? That's a weird explanation if that's the case. Like, I
I've
do not
never heard
merely
this
write
before.
scripts. I am the script doctor. Let me be heard.
I am a doctor who writes
Of
scripts.
words. He has consulted for government, business, and law enforcement, including the Central Intelligence Agency, the Office of Naval Intelligence, National Security Agency, Defense Language Institute, Defense Intelligence Agency, Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, the FBI, Interpol, and the LAPD. That's a lot of government agencies. Like I said, I honestly, like, even though I think the government probably still, there's obviously, there's obviously something happening, right? Like, we can establish that. So I can't imagine why the government wouldn't want to try and study it.
I just want to know what case it was that the LAPD was working on where they were like, we need a psychic.
We need Dr. Barry
Go
Taft.
find him.
Here's this goddamn girl's home. What we're talking about, Joe? What do you mean?
Oh, the LAPD wasn't involved, to my understanding, in this case.
To my knowledge.
You guys, I was just joking.
Yeah, I think he's.
It was a joke.
Allison, stop joking. It's not funny.
The police should have got involved, is what she meant.
They need the cops. Shoot that creature in the house, please.
Yeah, as soon as the entity appeared,
Like,
yeah, I'm
get
sure
it!
light up.
We need ghost bullets. In the spring of 2010, Dr. Taft released a new book called Aliens Above, Ghosts Below: Explorations of the Unknown. And that is the latest book he has released. It's a fun title. Gets you pulled in. You're like, ooh, really? Aliens are above, but ghosts are below? Oh my goodness. Okay. Kerry Gaynor, next person we're going to talk about. He earned a bachelor's degree in psychology from UCLA, then studied under Gil Boyne. I'm going to say it's Boyne, because I don't know how else to say that.
His name's an automatopoeia.
It's boy and then N-E. How do you say Boyne? Like that's all I could think of.
Boing.
Boyne. Gil Boyne. He was a pioneer in the field of hypnotherapy, and he earned his certification from the American Council of Hypnotist Examiners. On his website, most of what I could find about Kerry Gaynor is on the Kerry Gaynor Method website, which we'll talk about in a second. But it said the highly acclaimed American Council of Hypnosis Examiners, and I was like, let's bring it back. I've never heard of this place before. Highly acclaimed. Let's bring it back. His website seems very what's the word? Kind of like exaggerated to himself, but I don't know if that's not exaggerated. Is not the word I'm looking for. But
Like, was he bragging a
It
lot
just
on
seems
it?
very,
Or...
yeah, kinda. It just seems very extra. I don't know. Look up the Kerry Gaynor method website. It's interesting. He came up with the Kerry Gaynor method, which is a hypnotic technique designed to get people to quit smoking. He also has programs for sleep problems and like phobias. And I guess like essentially the smoking thing, like it's like from what I saw on the website, you like order DVDs, and through the DVD system you like do these hypnosis therapy sessions and just help with phobias. I think like I've also heard like it can help people with like OCDs and stuff. It can help like calm that, but it all depends on like, I don't know, it's not everyone is as susceptible to it. Some people are like really susceptible. It just depends, I guess. Who man, different.
I guess you only know if you try, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I remember, where were we? Oh, the Del Mar Fair. We watched a hypnosis show happened with like me, mom, and Johnny.
Really?
Yeah.
How did that go?
I mean, they whenever they do a they make you do weird things, and I'm like, it's like, it sounds scary that somebody could, if someone could actually have that kind of control over your body. There is a plant, if I remember correctly. It's like called the Devil's Horn or something, because it looks like a like trumpet, Devil's Trumpet. I think that's what it's called. And I guess when you dry it and turn it into a powder and like blow it in people's face, you can. People, I guess in like certain, they do it to tourists in some countries or something. I don't remember. It's been a while since I heard about this. But it was a specific plant that like can make you like it'll make you just be susceptible to what they tell you to do. So you'll forget, I guess. So they'll make you take you to their hotel room, and you'll give them all your cash and valuables, and then you'll just forget it happened. And I'm like, that is crazy. Plants are crazy. That is insane.
I
No,
hadn't
thank
heard
you.
of this plant before. It's also called how do you say that? Jimson weed. It's also called Jimson weed.
Yeah. It's crazy
Okay,
what plants can do, like, like magic mushrooms and stuff like that. Just like, it's insane.
Oh
And
my
the
gosh.
people, Alan and I were talking about like, like just humankind and how like everything that we now know is bad. There had to be one person at least that had to have tried it or done it for everyone else to know not to. Like they're like the first like poisonous mushroom. Like one guy in the village ate that shit, and everyone was like, "Don't eat it." Fucking Dan died over there. He ate it. He died.
Yeah.
Sacrifice to Dan. Thank you for dying. Now we all know not to eat the mushrooms.
Yep. Moment of silence for all of the
For our
souls in
ancestors.
history who took that jump, took that risk, tried something new, and died because of it. But to our benefit, we know what's up about it. So let's have a moment of appreciation for all of those people. Thank you.
Thank you
Thank you for trying. Yeah, take a stand.
So yeah. Anyway. That's about it about Kerry Gaynor. He worked on The Entity and the Sightings TV show. But beyond that, there wasn't much. I felt Dr. Barry Taft was slightly more interesting to talk about. Just he overall. And now we're gonna talk about Doris Bither. Most of what like is known about her like early adolescence and childhood comes from the book The Entity. The author, whose name escapes me at the moment, he like kind of to an extent befriended Doris, and over a few years she kind of just told him more and more about her life, I guess, and so that's how we have this small tidbits of information about her. So
it was Frank de Felita. That's the author.
That's a nice last name. De Felita. All right. Doris Bither. Her maiden name is Doris McGowan. She grew up in an upper middle class household and moved to California from the Midwest when she was 10 years old. She suffered abuse at an early age. Both her parents were apparently alcoholics, and she was disowned by them and as well as her extended family and cut off from all contact when she was a teenager. I'm not exactly sure how old. I think she was like 16 or something like that. She had a brother who received all her parents' inheritance when they died, really to really seal it in there that she was disowned. Like, they died, left her nothing. So there you go. She had a history of drug use. I've also heard she had a history of alcoholism. And then she also had a series of abusive ex-boyfriends and husbands. So it's just like one of those lives, you know?
Poor Doris.
Yeah.
It's really sad. She must have been so lonely.
Yes. I mean, I honestly couldn't even imagine being in, you know, that's like the polar opposite of my life. Like having like these abusive parents that disown you, and and then like, abusive husbands and boyfriends and stuff. I don't know anything about that.
It's true. It's something that's really hard to like. You can't just like put yourself in
Yeah.
the shoes of someone who's dealt with that, especially when it's been their whole lives. It's like you can't even imagine like what that does for you and how you feel about yourself and look at the world.
So she has at the time of the incident, she was in her about mid-30s. She had 4 children, 3 boys and 1 girl. Her boys were, the oldest was 16, the middle child was 13, and the youngest boy was 10, and her daughter was the youngest at 6 years old. They all came from different fathers, and I guess they were at the time, at least, I'm not entirely sure how long this extended for, but there was a lot of tension in their house, especially between her older sons and her. Which I guess I don't know, imagine, I guess because at the time her boyfriend was kind of an asshole, so I can imagine that brings tension to a family.
Oh yeah.
So just stuff like that. So it was already a kind of a tense environment in the house. And then the commentator in this story is the 13-year-old at the time. The middle child. Did an interview with the ghosttheory.com. I would very suggest. I was just going and checking it out to get all the tidbits of the interview. It was very interesting. It gives you a different insight from, like, you know, I guess what his perspective was as a child with this story happening. And then finally we talk about the house, the location, even though it's not necessarily the haunted location. This is what they were living in. A rustic 3-bedroom, 1 bath with just over 1,100 square feet that was built in 1924. The small Culver City home had the living room and kitchen in the front of the property, while the 3 bedrooms were in the back section of the house. Brian described the layout as an L shape, so the 2 front and then in the back was, yeah. The original house was only the living room and the kitchen part. The bedrooms were a later addition, and then there was a 2-level cellar which is under that part of the house, which is weird for LA. There aren't I know that there are, or just in California in general, I know that there are houses, especially like in 1924. I'm sure people weren't as understanding about the sandstone type of, you know, sandy layout we have here, that to now make it so we can't have basements.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they're just like, let's build it. So yeah.
You said it was like a 2-layer?
A 2-level cellar, yeah. So there would be the top 2 houses, the top 2 rooms on top of the house, and then you'd go down into one part of the cellar, and then I guess you can go down again into another. This part of I read that the house was renovated in 1935, so that might have been when they added the where they cut off the cellar parts, like cemented over it or wherever they did. It could just still be like the 2 open cellars just down there, just sealed up, you know? Like, I don't know if they would have filled it.
That
That's
sounds
kind of
like
eerie.
fun. I want to go.
Yeah, like, yeah, it's like it's whoever lives there now could, like, find, I don't know, where they would have, you'd have to, like, probably get some, I don't know, you have to find out what's the LiDAR? Like, penetrate the ground.
Oh yeah, lidar or not lidar. Yeah, ground penetrating radar.
Yeah, you need that shit. Find out where the hole is, and maybe you got a basement down there, guy. Whoever lives there. um,
A two level,
yeah,
no
two
less.
cellar basement. Dr. Barry Taft reported that the house had been condemned twice by the city of LA, but the son Brian says that didn't happen. And when you say condemned, like you hear condemned, you're like, oh my god, it unlivable. But I looked it up, and it doesn't really mean that. Like, just like it could just mean that the city codes changed, right? And like your balcony or something is now, or something about your house, they can condemn it, and then if you like repair it, fix it, and update it to code, no longer condemned. So it doesn't necessarily mean the house is not a livable place. And given that it, like I said, it did used to have a cellar, they could have, condemned it for that period of time before the residents sealed it off and then it uncondemned. So it's just that easy. At least, like, the house wasn't in this absolute squalor condition that Dr. Barry Taft kind of lays out in his report.
I mentioned this before, but I just imagine that he has incredibly high standards, and so like if he can't like wear a white glove and swipe it across the top of a cabinet and have it come off clean, he's like, this is absolute squalor. This place is condemned.
Trash. I hate it here. It's trash. But yeah. So, I mean, yeah, he says that it just wasn't like that bad like he describes it. So yeah, let's get into the story. So the activity reportedly began after an elderly woman came to the house and stated that she had lived there in the past and that the house was evil. I don't, like, I guess this part of the story came out after, like, later. I think this is from Brian that brought this up exactly. I'm not exactly sure who brought this up, but it wasn't, like, originally brought up in the, like, to Barry Taft, I guess. You know what I'm saying? It's a later addition to the story, so rather not it is true, I'm not sure. But it is weird.
Let's hear it.
So they report that life in the house was isolating. The house was small, the family itself, like I said, there was a lot of tension, and so they weren't necessarily like a close-knit family. They're kind of like meh about each other. By the time the investigation began, the house had gained a reputation for being haunted, which brought neighbors lurking around and invading their privacy even farther, which then led to them even more isolating from the community. So isolated, tension-filled house is what we're dealing with. The activity in the house ranged from the feeling of cold spots to seeing full apparitions. The whole family were subjected to the attacks, but Doris got the most of them, being bitten and scratched and pushed. There were apparently 3 spirits reported by Dr. Taft, but the children, apparently, at least the children encountered like a 4th spirit. So it's possible that, like, maybe this one didn't do anything except like interact with the children. So they didn't know about it, like the adults in the situation. The 4th, they named, it's kind of a creepy name. They named it Mr. Who's It. Like, creepy.
Oh my god.
Right? Like, if you talk to your child, they're like, I have an imaginary friend. You're like, oh, what's their name? Like, it's Mr. Who's It. Like, oh my god. No.
It's a goddamn demon.
There's a demon in the house.
The children named it?
Yeah, the children named it Mr. Who's It.
I love that name.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, that is a terrifying name. Like, that seems like a name in a horror movie that, like, oh, that's the demon, Mr. Who's It. Like it's just like what's another one, like the Bobbledygook or whatever. Like it's on that level for me. Like it just sounds like a really creepy name.
Yeah. It's just like, no, thank you. And also, Brian Harris says it was his grandfather. And when asked, like, by the interviewer, like, why do you think it was your grandfather? He said, it told me.
Oh
So
my
Mr.
god.
Who's a fucking liar.
He said that it looked like his grandfather and that it told him it was his grandfather.
Creepy. God, that's so scary.
So, yeah.
But it was called the What's It?
They called it Mr. Who's It.
Mr. Who's It, but it's actually his grandpa. This sounds like a demon disguising itself as his grandpa. I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah,
This
so,
is the kind of stuff they pull.
yeah. So here's a couple quotes from this section. About the house and the family dynamic. They said the home was unstable. We did fight a lot. My older brother was mean to us, so there was a lot of tension. My mother's boyfriend at the time left because he could not handle the activity, the poltergeists, and the tension building up in the house, which Brian says was a good thing because he was a bastard. And then about the entities, he says that it was as if they showed themselves whenever they wanted. So like whenever it felt like messing with somebody, it would just roll up and do it, kind of thing. And he says at times it would be annoying. We would be watching television and these things would walk by like nothing. We were so used to it at one point we just stopped caring. So they just like kind of ignored it. You know, once it's just like another housemate almost, like an annoying housemate you just kind of ignore, which I don't like.
I guess that's one way to deal with it.
I mean, I guess. I mean, like the priests and everyone, you know, everyone says like if you ignore it, it will.
You'll go away.
I mean, I don't know about it'll. I guess it just doesn't get as much energy. But if there's, I don't know. So yeah.
Sounds like they are giving it a lot of attention, to be honest.
I mean, what do you? I don't know. Like, and when you're like physically assaulted, like, what else do you do? I don't know.
I don't know either. I don't know what the solution to that would be. Well, I don't think that kind of thing would work on a poltergeist. Like when that one woman was being advised by a priest, I don't think the priest was thinking, "Oh, it's a poltergeist." He's thinking, "Lady, it's a goddamn demon. You need not think about it."
There's demons here.
But yeah, if it's a poltergeist and it's emanating from you and it's affecting you, I don't see why, like, you can't just ignore something like that. You can't like run from your own like inner demons the same way maybe you could like a real demon.
I don't like it. Okay, Doris Bither. Let's talk about how she met the parapsychologists. She was in Hunter's bookstore with her friend when she overheard Barry Taft talking about his work in parapsychology. I'm not exactly sure what he was talking about, but he was talking about ghost shit. She was like, I know about some ghost shit. And so she walked over to him and told him, like, my house is haunted. And she wanted him to come and, like, help her. And Barry Taft and his colleague, Kerry Gaynor, went over to her house and they conducted a 2-hour interview with her. Initially she was being vague about, like, just in general, like, just about, like, even her age and stuff, I guess. She was, like, didn't want to, like, be too disclosive about it. But she gave him, like, little tidbits, like, you know, we were attacked here, and this is what this happened. But after toward the end of the investigation, she had told them about that she had been held down by 2 smaller spirits while a larger one had raped her. And the investigators initially did not believe what she said, thought she was, quote, psychotic, and they gave her the number to a psychiatrist and was like, okay, bye. So yeah.
I mean, same.
Yeah.
I would have done the same thing. It's like, girl, I don't know what you want. I don't know what drugs you need. But he's a doctor.
So it wasn't until the activity was seen by people from outside the home. I've heard it was either neighbors or her friends, her family friend or something, but somebody else saw it. And so she told the investigator, she's like, yo, somebody else saw it. Someone else knows. Come back. They came back, and for 2.5 months, they would go over and they would conduct interviews at the house and do like tests and take pictures and do all that ghostly hunting type of stuff you expect. Right? Apparently during the time that they investigated the house, the rape attacks specifically had completely stopped, but there was still activity in the house. It was noted that when certain music was played, the activity would increase. During the time of the investigations, the team saw lights and poltergeist activity. Though overall activity in the house seemed to escalate every time the investigation team would leave. This is what Brian would say, that he hated when they came over because it would like escalate the activity. And then one night, when there was a team of 28 people at the house, the activity had amplified like out of nowhere into a full-on, what they call a manifestation. They saw lime-colored orbs flying around the room, and when provoked, the upper torso of a bald-headed, muscular man manifested in the hallway. This was seen by all 28 people in the team, but none of them were able to. They apparently had like at least like 20 cameras set to take pictures at different light frequencies and all that, infrared, all that. They're ready, but none of those pictures captured it. So yeah, but apparently everyone at the time when they
Bummer.
yeah boo.
Yeah.
But at the time when everyone had seen it, and what Barry Taft said was that everything that they had managed to photograph, they didn't physically see with their eyes, and everything that they did see with their eyes, they were not able to photograph.
I wonder why that would be.
Isn't that interesting?
It's very interesting. I don't know why that would be. Maybe it's like different kinds. Okay, so I think maybe the theory would be that different types of phenomenon. I remember we were watching that one Ghost Adventures episode when they were at the Pointer Lighthouse, and remember at one point they were doing EVPs, and they did two separate sessions. One with a certain kind of video camera or like recording device, and the other one that was using silver tape, because there was a theory that a different kind of recording device may potentially be more sensitive to certain kinds of paranormal, like voice register or being able to pick up sounds more. So maybe it's on that line.
Maybe I don't know. It could. I don't know. Maybe it's like the wavelength that it's existing on, or maybe it can just manipulate itself to only be captured when it wants to be on certain things. Because whatever it's in, and who knows? Craziness. That's what it is. It's craziness. Insanity, we say. Okay, so let's do some more quotes from Brian. We're gonna talk about about Barry. Okay, so about about them like coming over. He says it was hell. There I was, barely out of elementary school, trying to carry on and ignore it all. And there was so much commotion going on between Barry's team of 30 or so people crammed into a small house, cheering and yelling at this thing. I was in the next room trying to watch television, just trying to mind my own business. That sounds shitty. And then the music was Black Sabbath and You're a Heap. like specific songs when they like that talked about like good
Yeah,
versus
I feel
evil.
bad for those kids having to deal with all that crazy shit. Like that's too much for a little child to take. Like I don't know. I think it's obnoxious.
And then when he talks about like the like attacks on his mom, he says there were times where we would see it happen in front of us. It was like a man was standing in front of my mother and would start to beat her. Imagine a woman being beaten. You could see her being picked up and thrown around, sounds, slaps, but there was no one there to actually do it. We all felt it too, pulling, biting, scratching. We were all attacked. So, it's shitty. And insane. Can imagine. It wasn't until after shortly after the investigations, Doris ended up moving from the house and the activity followed. Neighbors in her new, I believe, apartment began experiencing poltergeist activity as well. At the time of the movie release in the early 80s, the activities had decreased but hadn't fully stopped. I guess they like ran into her at the premiere, one of the premieres, and yeah, it still hadn't stopped. And that was like the movie premiere happened like almost 7 years or something after the activity of the investigation.
Mm-hmm.
So it was like that. Oh my god. And Doris Bither died in 1995 of pulmonary arrest.
What a hard life.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm not sure if it, like, ever really stopped. From what I read, Brian, and, like, ended up not really being close with his mom, or I don't think any of his siblings were. Because she just, I guess, continued to have, issues they just couldn't deal with, I guess. But yeah, it's a sad story. It's an interesting story. And the movie, Allison, we all watched it. How did you guys feel about the movie?
It was good. It was a good movie. I just don't like. I don't like. It was a lot. That's what I have to say about it. It was like, I don't like those kind of movies that like glorify rape. I don't say it was glorifying, but like shit, it was a lot.
Yeah, I don't think glorify was
I don't think that's the
word
you're looking for. I mean, I just don't think you're used to seeing something that intense, obviously. And
I think she means depiction.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of tension, there's a lot of build up. Like at some point, you're just waiting for something to happen, and you're wondering what is it going to be, what's going to happen now, because you just know something's going to happen. And then it leads to another attack or something unexpected, totally unexpected happening. Like when the activity, for example, occurred at her friend's house when she went to stay there or to visit, and then all the windows started shattering.
Yeah. No, thank you.
I did not see that coming. That was crazy. Her poor house.
Oh, yeah. I really liked that character, by the way, in the movie, the friend. She was such a supportive friend. I loved it.
Yeah, she was a homie.
Alan said Barry Taft actually was consulting in that movie, having been one of the person who was there. There are different parts that are dramatized, of course. Like the whole scene at the very end. Just minor spoilers, perhaps not going to go too much into detail, where the parapsychological researchers at the university create like a model of her home for her to live in so that they could record like everything that's happening in there. That actually never happened, but we learned from an interview with Taft on the case that was something that they had drawn up plans for in real life, that they would have liked to do.
They didn't have university funding.
They did not have the funding for something like that, but it was something they really wanted to do, and so they depicted that in the film as if could have done something like that. So I thought that was cool to see.
The son said that like the actress did a really good job at the way that they depicted it was very similar to what they experienced, like having like the bruises all over her legs and stuff. That was something that actually like happened. Poltergeist in general, like just I don't know, the idea of something that can like interact that intensely with an environment around you, you know? Like it's one thing when you just see a ghost and but you're like, okay, but it really can't physically do anything to you, to where you know this thing can like throw something heavy across the room at you or something at any time, or physically hurt you. Don't want that.
Yeah, it's definitely shit. Yeah, I wouldn't want that either.
Like
I think it's definitely like eye-opening because I've never heard of like actual cases of these things. And like this guy who like found her and stuff, like he's a pretty renowned person. Like he's done a lot of things for the government and stuff. I don't know, super weird.
that makes me sus, man. I want to know what the government knows about ghosts and paranormal activities.
Damn it, Dr. Taft, what do you know?
Well, I know. I guess if you read his book.
Poltergeists are like rather scary. Just the idea of something following you, I think, is universally
Yeah.
extremely scary.
Not being able to, like, you know, in a haunted house, they're like, oh, we moved out, you know, we can leave. But when it's like the occasions when it's attached to, it becomes attached to a person, and they like, you know, you can't leave, or an object or something, and it's like, oh, this is my grandma gave me this music box, and then it has a ghost attached to it. You know, those situations. That sounds like that sounds awful. Like, why you gotta attach like a parasite? I don't like that.
That's why I thought parapsychology was a really interesting concept, because the only way they can address it is by going to the root of the problem, which is, in this case, the person themselves who's being afflicted, and trying to work through with them whatever issues they're having and as a way to better understand the phenomenon and why things are happening and why they're happening the way that they're happening. Like when they did the analysis of the case in the New England poltergeist activity, and they were talking about her background and her, um, you know, conflict with family and religion, and how representations of that could be traced to the manifestations, and how if they get to the root cause of her, her sadness and anxiety, maybe they could help her with these afflictions. And I think that's such a fascinating idea. I imagine that's what they were trying to do with Doris.
But that's even just
during...
assuming that's what it is. Like, that's assuming that the person itself or themselves are capable of manifesting these phenomena, not like just something else that is attaching itself to the person because they are able to like feed off of their personal grief or something easier than a person who is not holding emotional baggage, I guess.
That is a long-running trope where people of certain mental states become more susceptible for like what is it called? Possession. That's what I was thinking. Like being possessed. You have to be of a certain like mental weakness or certain state in order to be susceptible to possession. So yeah, that kind of thing is something to consider.
Parapsychology, there's the studies of people being able to basically use, you know, like force like powers, right? Like move things with their mind, telekinesis type of stuff. But you know how true that actually is, and how, you know, I don't know. I'm not a parapsychologist.
Like the Stephen King Kerry book.
Yeah, like where people can, you know, start fires with their minds or something. Just do those things. But I don't know if that's, you know, if that's even an actual thing. If it is, humans basically have superpowers, but we just have to unlock them somehow.
Well, the mind is a powerful thing.
It is.
Definitely.
The human brain is strange. It does so much, but it can fuck you up so much too.
On that note, thank you everyone for listening. This has been an episode of Girls vs. Ghouls. Tune in next week for another episode, and follow us on social media at Girls vs. Ghoul on Instagram and Girls vs. Ghouls on YouTube for recordings of the podcast in that format, with additional pictures and references of things we talk about, and upcoming vlogs that we're going to be doing in the near future. Okay, goodbye everyone, and have a good night.
Bye.
Say bye everyone.
Good night.